Hi there. Good afternoon. Hopefully, everyone can hear me well, especially in the back usually. Okay, well, welcome to today's session on AI itself is not the end goal, but what are you actually need to do to drive these results. So we, as Ireckonu, are a global organization, a software company that is predominantly based in Amsterdam, and we provide a middleware solution. And so we ingest basically all data and bring that back towards the systems. So in order to actually do that is you need to ensure that all these data points are connected to a particular profile. If you want to do something with AI, you need to have a good foundation from a data perspective in order to move forward. And here on the slide, you can actually see that you can tie marketing data points as well as loyalty, restaurant, POS. This is all what can be ingested. We ensure that these data points are actually connected, and eventually we update the corresponding systems such that the relevant information is actually present. And with this foundation, basically, you can leverage AI to take the next step, to serve the guest better, to ensure that preferences and desires are actually mapped. So AI on itself is actually just a tool and not the destination, actually. So I recently finished a PhD in doing AI and machine learning in the hospitality. And by doing these different researches and case studies, I actually learned quite a lot in general on how hoteliers are actually looking towards AI and what actually needs to be done in order to be successful with the implementation of a machine learning algorithm. So today's session is basically going over these 3 points, and these are the three key takeaways that we are going over. So the importance of actually have a strong data foundation, and you actually need to be quite focused on where you want to implement AI. So again, AI is just a tool and it's not the destination. So you really want to drive certain results. And in order to do so, you need to measure that. And therefore, we need to create a proper feedback loop in order to actually measure the ROI on the AI. And I will come with an example a little bit later on. So the foundation on itself, the first-party data, basically that a hotel owns, becomes more and more important, especially because cookies are going to disappear, as we all know. And therefore, your own data foundation is really something that you actually need to invest in. The classical phrase within machine learning is actually garbage in is garbage out. If you do not have a central place where you tie all these data points towards a particular profile, it is quite difficult eventually to apply AI because it is as good as the data on itself in order to make predictions or classifications or doing some kind of clustering. So the question then actually becomes, how are we able to connect all these data points that sometimes there are within a guest journey, right? So if we are looking at all these different data points and towards the guest journey, there are actually, it's completely fragmented in the IT infrastructure that you actually have as a hotel. And this first needs to be solved before you are actually going to do something with AI. Otherwise, you always have a very partial view on the data, and therefore you can make partial predictions. Again, garbage in is garbage out. So if we are looking at these different data points, right, for a particular profile, let's say John Doe, a PMS actually measures or collects the data on when a reservation is created and the check-in and the check-out moments, for example. And a CRM might create a profile, and eventually at the end with the checkout, you update the loyalty status. And maybe 6 days later, or actually 2 weeks later, somebody writes a review. Then from a marketing automation standpoint, you actually also want to reach out towards these guests. It's all scattered in different systems, but it says a lot about the engagement of a guest. So what you actually want to do is you want to have a place within your IT infrastructure where you can map all these data points together and you can really see a profile activity timeline. Right now, we are only looking at just one profile, but that's not your entire customer base, right? We actually potentially have millions of profiles if you are a very large hotel chain, if you want to actually do proper AI. So eventually creating these timelines and actually be able to visualize it is something quite crucial to take the next step. So in order to unlock the capabilities of machine learning and artificial intelligence, we really need to have a strong data foundation in order to build further upon, actually. Once we have this data foundation, actually the next step is looking at how are you going to leverage these machine learning models, and are you able to retrain with as less friction as possible. As we all know that these guest preferences and expectations actually evolve over time. So it is not something static that we are looking at if we are talking about an active customer base, right? So on the left-hand side, you actually see a capsule hotel where, of course, the needs of a guest are completely different than a 5-star luxury hotel chain. But with the foundation, you are actually able, with a good foundation, to track these changes in your active customer base. And then from that point onwards, the next step is actually to say, okay, at this moment within the guest journey, that's where we actually want to implement AI. We want to drive, for example, revenue. We want to drive upsell. If we are looking at upsell, are we then only looking at what's been bought in the past? Or are we also interested eventually, if you want to enhance it, to say, okay, somebody clicked in a certain marketing email for the restaurant or for the spa or for the golf in order to push this a little bit further. So you actually need to be quite focused, hyper-focused as I actually want to call it, with implementing an AI strategy here that will actually maximize the returns on this. So we need to focus basically on the efforts to build and ultimately automate the learning as well. Every couple weeks, there are so many new data points actually be added towards this data foundation, and that's actually what you want to make use of to make the next predictions. So if we are looking at a couple examples here for, let's say, you have AI-driven chatbots and potentially virtual assistants, and also some other sessions right now that are going around talk a lot about implementing Gen AI in order to serve the guest better. But we really have to think, if we want to serve the guest better, where does this data come from? How are you recognizing the guest? Again, it comes back from how good is your data foundation in order to actually use this during a chat that a guest is actually firing up. A recommender engine for potential upsell, let's say. Are we going to implement this within the booking engine? Are we going to implement this within the app? Or maybe during a pre-stay email? These are all different touch points where potentially you can actually implement this. You wouldn't use the same machine learning model for a during stay upsell as a pre-arrival email that you're actually sending out, because then at some moment guests actually have a different mindset at that moment in time. This mindset can actually be loaded in if you recognize this guest and actually tie back all these data points towards this profile activity timeline. Churn management is another one. You want to recognize when somebody is about to walk away based on all the interactions that someone did, and then you want to proactively send out the discount code because regular marketing didn't really do the trick in getting the people back. So you need to do something differently, right? So really be focused on where you actually want to implement this and how you are actually going to measure this. And in order to give you a little bit of more of a deep dive into this, I picked the recommender engine as a use case that we actually can go over. So during my research that I've done with my PhD, I actually was able to say that if we are recommending products at the right moment in time, very specifically during the booking engine in this case, we are able to sell 11% more services through a machine learning powered recommendation versus a standard top 3 that you're actually giving. So it actually gives you also the ability, if you do a quick math equation here, if you know that your average services that you are selling times the amount of revenue that you're actually getting, you can actually already make a very good estimation here if you want to implement this, if it actually drives revenue for your hotel chain, yes or no. But the important part eventually to measure this is to create this feedback loop. And creating this feedback loop actually drive and measure the ROI on these kind of projects. If you want to implement AI or some kind of machine learning, it is really on its essence another software implementation that you are basically doing. And as we all know, a lot of the software implementations that we are doing as hotels are sometimes not as successful. So we need to ensure that we are able to measure this at the right moment in time as well. So, and with these feedback loops, we are actually able to translate as well the increase of guest lifetime value. So if we want to implement a recommender engine, right, during a booking engine, we actually need to sketch again this profile activity timeline that we were talking about in the beginning. So with that is basically what we want to do is the desired profile activity timeline that we are seeing here is first you need to create some kind of recommendation, right, based on all the data that you have of that particular guest. Then you want to send out an email. Potentially someone can actually open it. A little bit later, the reservation is created. And then eventually the product is consumed. We really have to ensure that whatever we recommended and we sold, it is also actually consumed. Someone can cancel, right? So we have to take that into account. We do not only want to see from the moment that we are recommending a particular service, and if somebody clicked only on it. So if we are expanding this, it's actually coming from 3 different platforms potentially, right? So we have the machine learning platform where we potentially retrain based on all these new data points that we are getting in the recommendation that we are actually seeing. In the marketing automation tool, we want to implement that to send out eventually the email with that recommendation in it, because the machine learning platform is not actually doing it. And eventually you want to see if the reservation is created and also consumed. And the last component is actually where the challenge is with implementing AI. Are we able to, with all the data that we have of a particular guest, actually providing the right recommendation with maybe the 15 different services that you are actually able to offer towards this guest? And then eventually, in the end, is the product actually consumed? And to create this relationship between these 2 data points is actually quite difficult. It is definitely not an easy task to do, but this is actually how you are measuring the ROI on these kind of projects. And therefore, AI is just a tool, actually, to eventually say, we are able to drive more revenue and engage better with the guest and to build that relationship and not only looking at one transaction that you are actually doing. So going back towards it, it's connecting all these data points basically and being able to say this data point is actually powered by AI and this is eventually what we are getting in return. You can do simple A/B testing, right, on a group of guests where you are saying, here, this is where I'm going to send a sender top 3 that I'm going to recommend. And with the other one, you actually want to say, this is where we are going to recommend different kinds of products. And create that red line is really essential. So creating this profile activity timeline should be the start of your project when you are going to implement AI, if you really want to serve the guest better. And basically, to recap what we've just discussed, basically, we need to build a strong foundation, right? Eventually to really ensure that at the right moment in time, we are implementing AI and also the usage of it. And therefore, afterwards, we want to create this feedback loop. Are we able to see what we've recommended towards the guests? Did they actually consume it? It's a bit of a pity to actually say that, yeah, we've done a successful AI project, and eventually your CEO or your CIO is actually asking, yeah, did it actually drive more revenue, or are we right now just showing off that we are doing AI? And those are 2 different things. So really ensure that you are able to tie it back towards the guest and see if you can serve the guest better, yes or no. For people who are actually interested in my research, you can actually scan the left QR code. You are potentially able to connect with me. And on the right-hand side is actually a couple case studies within Ireckonu on AI. So hopefully you actually learn something from this talk. It's a little bit of a shift on how you should look at AI and actually be able to measure things. And if there are any questions, more than happy to answer one or two. Thank you.